You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. If you're listening, and I assume you are, we have some big news that we'd like to share with you. As longtime listeners know, we've had a really good relationship with the folks over at Leica Camera, and that relationship was formalized recently with Leica coming on as a sponsor of our podcast, and we really could not be more pleased with this collaboration. Leica is going to be sponsoring several episodes of our show over the coming year, and like today's show, some of these episodes will feature noted Leica photographers. And we encourage you to follow the link in our show notes to the Leica product page on the B&H Photo website and to check out the latest cameras, lenses, and accessories from Leica Camera. Now, on with the show. We've had some great young photographers on our show over the years, and we've welcomed a few legends of the medium as well. But it's not often that we have a guest who has actually had a direct hand in defining the parameters of what we call a good photograph. Today is a special day here at the B&H Photography Podcast as John and I welcome Mr. Ralph Gibson to the show. Greetings and welcome to our podcast, Ralph Gibson.
Well, I'm very glad to be here. It's truly an honor. I hold B&H in the highest regard, and I look forward to discussing some of my ideas with you.
Suffice to say, we're terribly excited to talk with Ralph about a range of topics, including his latest book, Sacred Land. But first, let me give you a few tidbits here. Ralph has published more than 40 books of his photography, including his latest book, Sacred Land, as I mentioned. We're going to be talking about that. His work is in the MoMA, the Met, and hundreds of collections. He started Lustrum Press and published Larry Clark's Tulsa. He's been knighted by the French government, and he assisted Dorothea Lange and collaborated on 2 films with Robert Frank. He's also a noted Leica photographer, and perhaps most impressive is that after decades of peering through a viewfinder, he remains a student of the art and craft of photography. Like I said up front, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here. Perhaps we could start by talking a little bit about Dorothea Lange and Robert Frank. You worked with Dorothea late in her life and said she had a little technical command of her craft and that Frank was indifferent to how he exposed and developed his film. If technical matters were of little concern to these great artists, what was the force or the skills that they shared?
Well, we have to go back to the nature of the time. I learned photography in the Navy in 1956, and you have to recall that in those days, the materials were very slow. The lenses were slow. You had to mix developer from bulk. And so actually becoming a photographer was quite a difficult accomplishment. You had to spend years learning the darkroom. So I came out of the Navy after 3 years in the darkroom with nothing to do but study. And I came out of the Navy very advanced as a young photographer on a purely technical level. And when Dorothea...
Question, do you still have your copy of the Navy Photography Manual? Because the Navy happened to produce one of the best photography manuals and how-to guides ever back in the time. Am I right about that?
That's absolutely true, Alan. And you know, when I went up for my third class stripe, I basically memorized that manual. And when I went up for second class, I memorized it again. And about the time I was moving through those ranks, my chief petty officer said to me, "Gibson, I want you to learn everything and then forget what you don't need to use." Mm. Which is essentially how I've approached Photoshop. But we can get to that later.
Okay. Anyway, continue with your story. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I came out of the Navy 4 years later in 1960 and went to art school in San Francisco. I was there in my first semester, and Dorothea Lange was looking for an assistant. And she called Paul Hassel, my instructor, head of the department, and asked Paul. And so Paul immediately recommended me because I was, in fact, technically advanced, and I thought that technique was what signified excellence in photography. You have to recall that about this time, Ansel Adams was coming along with the zone system, had made a massive impact. And so technique was a big thing in those days in the nature of the medium. I'm basically referring to the speed of lenses, the speed of film, and the chemistry. So I hitchhiked over to Berkeley to work for Dorothea my first day, and we're in her darkroom, and it was very, very dark for printing. And so I immediately added more light and more amber light, safe light, and we started printing. And, I was knocking out these prints and noticing that when she would ask me to change something, she was not entirely clear. And so it didn't take me long to realize that this great, great photographer, the first master I was privileged to observe intimately, this great woman didn't find her greatness in the darkroom. It was the force of her will. It was the strength of her vision that compelled photography to obey her intention. And so we would print all day and many different paper surfaces. And at the end of the day, you could hardly tell which print you liked better. But I would be exhausted, and she would go off to the opera with Adlai Stevenson or something, completely regenerated inspired from her work.
Wow.
Following up then with a similar question about Robert Frank. I mean, here are two folks who, we all put up as two of the greatest, and yet, their interests or their primary interest didn't lie in the technical matters. And do you see that is there something about great artists who can just kind of ignore that side of it, or not ignore necessarily, but just realize where their strength does come and go forward regardless? Because I know many photographers who've kind of gotten stuck in that morass of, well, I'm not a good technical photographer, so therefore I can't go forward.
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, my perception is somewhat opposite. Mm-hmm. Let's consider somebody who wants to be a photographer and make photographs. He or she attempts to excel in the darkroom, learn the medium as best they can. And then there's another kind of photographer who's a person who wants to say something, and they discover that they can only say it through photography. And then they have to explore technique in order to get satisfaction, in order to get their statement, the content that they're intending, finally evident in a print. This is a different approach to technique. It's how I came up with my look, because I was, as I mentioned previously, very advanced in the darkroom, but when I was printing most of my early work, it was not satisfying me because my vision and my technique in the darkroom had not come together. This is a vast subject that we discuss in my workshops, in my seminars online for the Leica Academy. Mm-hmm. Getting to this point takes some time. And we see the same thing in today's photographers who basically just learn Photoshop, and the better they get at it, the more their pictures look like they're good at Photoshop, but they're not really saying anything.
Well, how do you find that how do you find that voice then? I mean, obviously that's a huge question, but maybe using yourself as an example or just your years of experience. I mean, how does a photographer or an artist, continue through the technique to find their voice?
Well, the term that I use for this is called visual signature, because you can recognize a Cartier-Bresson from across the parking lot. You don't really have to go up and look for his signature under the picture. Now, a visual signature is a combination of a number of intensely personal ingredients, which takes some time for the photographer to understand. Again, I have to go back to the essential nature of the content. What is it we are trying to express? If you want to be a landscape photographer, you're assuming a role in the oldest history of photography in American art, and you're making variations on a previously announced theme. This is what landscape photography is. But then the photographers that we admire most intensely are essentially those who have kicked open a door and announced their own personal theme, as opposed to making variations on previously announced themes.
On that same note, then, it'd probably be fair to say that many photographers today, and a lot of photographers rely specifically on their smartphones to take pictures, that visual signature is even more solidified as a mass signature because everyone's using the same tool, essentially, with the same focal length and the same perspective. Is that fair to say?
Well, I did a TED Talk a few years ago entitled "How to Find Your Visual Identity in a Digital World," and the software that makes everybody a photographer on your iPhone and your smartphone. This software also, unfortunately, makes everybody's photographs look identical, and so we have not seen. Considering how many photographs or so-called images have been made on these smartphones, I'm still waiting for the masterpieces to show up. I'm still waiting for something that's really worth looking at for a long period of time. And that's the caveat. That's the price you pay. How to transcend that limitation and exploit the liberty that the smartphone gives you has yet to be determined.
Good point.
Hope you don't mind if I keep on the Robert Frank line of questioning a little bit, but I was really curious about a line that you mentioned regarding his book, The Americans, and it said it galvanized, when the book came out, it galvanized and flattened my whole generation of photographers. I can understand the idea of galvanizing it, but what did you mean when you say it flattened the whole generation of photographers?
Well, I think that I was saying that it was like that feeling you get when you run into a glass door, bang. because prior to Robert, Cartier-Bresson pretty much ruled the street, and then Robert came along, and through a combination of various components, essentially great brilliance in camera handling with his Leica. He kicked open a door that we did not know had previously existed, and he made a statement that heretofore had not ever been made. We had not seen photographs of that power. That was predicated on his circumstance as an immigrant and many things. But where do you go from the Americans if you're a street photographer? You see, the reason why The Americans remains the best-selling photography book of all times is because it has the common touch, and it has changed as society changes. You have to realize that book came out in the middle to late 50s, and as society changes its complexion every 25 or 30 years, The Americans means something somewhat different, and it continues to evolve as a social fabric continues to evolve.
But personally, I mean, and in your sphere of other photographers at the time, was it one of those kind of watershed moments? I mean, when you got your hands on that book and you thumbed through it for the first time, you were just blown away? Yeah.
Photographers of my generation were simultaneously inspired and intimidated by The Americans. Because unless you were somebody who just wanted to do imitations, put the feather in somebody else's cap, where do you go from The Americans on the street if you're a street photographer? And I realized very early on that I was not really destined to be what we will call a documentary or journalist photographer. I was much too solipsistic. My own set of concerns were essentially what I wanted to inform my photograph, which is something that Robert did. You see, it was his perception of America during the 50s that brought a tremendous amount of virtuosity mixed with vitriol to the photograph. And now to get advanced, when I moved to New York in 1967 and met him and started working with him on his films, we did talk about photography, but I noticed his creative process. You see, Alan, what we're really discussing here is the creative process and how it influences, informs, and configures a photographer's body of work. And so watching Robert work on me and my brother and Conversations in Vermont, the films that I worked with him on, I could see that he was constantly on the edge pushing himself. Now, a very brief aside, during this period, I saw some of his apprentice work from Switzerland, which is where he shot brass gears floating on glass with a view camera. And then they would opaque all the teeth in the gears. I mean, he was a commercial photographer of the old school of the very highest rank, technically. And so for Robert to come to doing the Americans, where he would deliberately sabotage the exposure and throw in a blur and put the camera where it didn't belong, he was introducing a gestural, expressionistic aspect to the work, which was in direct opposition to the severe discipline of his apprenticeship.
I love that idea that you're getting to about creative process determining, or at least lending its hand in creating the visual signature, and kind of getting specific to your work. I mean, how would you define your process? I mean, are you somebody who shoots a lot? I mean, are you somebody who sees an image, takes one take, and that's that? I mean, are these elements that come into play as you develop your own signature?
Well, that's sort of a multiple choice question, but the truth is that I realized very early on, I had a brief relationship with Magnum as a photojournalist, and I dropped out about the time I met Robert. And I realized very early on that I did not want to photograph for other people. A big part of how I became the photographer I am was that I determined very early on that I was only going to make photographs that were going to reflect my own set of concerns, and I was going to be the one who determined whether or not it was a successful photograph. So this is in direct opposition to the journeyman photographer who waits for the phone to ring and gets an assignment, goes off and shoot and delivers the print. I just wanted to use the work photography in the most introspective way that I could. And I have discussed this approach as I started traveling and meeting other great masters in Europe. That's all we ever talk about. If you mention a great photographer whom I happen to have met, I can tell you before you even mention his or her name that all we really ever talked about over the last 30 or 40 years was, how do you do it? What is your point of departure? What is your creative process? What are you essentially attempting to imbue your photographs with?
From the time you said to yourself that I'm only going to take the kind of photographs that I want to take, how long was it from that point to the point where you're actually making money and financing yourself and paying your way by taking your own photographs?
Well, I did a book. I started working on a book in 1968, which I published in 1970, entitled The Somnambulist. Now, I was living at the Chelsea Hotel. I owed 9 months' rent. I had 2 of my 3 Leicas in pawn up in 7th Avenue and 34th Street.
You were a true artist.
I was, but at the same time, I was in my late 20s, and I had nothing but energy and ambition and absolute and total faith that I would prevail.
Okay.
Not a shadow of a doubt has ever entered my consciousness as to my relationship to the medium and its relationship to me. So when did I start making a living? Well, that book came out, and 3 months later, I was very well known in a very small community around the world, photography. And I just started getting by on a month-to-month basis. And
so it was gradual. It was gradual then. It wasn't just bang.
It was touch and go. But again, I was young and ambitious, and I wanted something in my photographs much more than I wanted security. And I've always believed that if I stayed true to my work, everything else would fall in place. It's an interesting concept, but I know this to be true because that belief, that credence, has supported me for 60 years.
Yeah, that's a great answer. It's actually answered the question I was going to get at. This is John, by the way. To this idea that you mentioned, this you never had a shadow of a doubt that this was the path for you. And my question is, how important is that in for the success of an artist or a photographer or really anyone? I mean, is this kind of supreme confidence something that we all really need to have if we want to kind of go forward with these bold type of photography?
Well, it depends who you're asking.
Yeah, well, I'm asking you.
In my case, I had a vocation.
True.
I was chosen. I'm not the music. I'm something through. I'm the radio. I'm something through which photography speaks. I just get to share in the making of these photographs. I have a very very personal relationship to the medium, which I'm not hesitant to share. But I know that everybody else is different. I know that every photographer I've ever known or met has a different relationship to the medium. And I am not suggesting for a moment, for a nanosecond, that my way is the right way for somebody else. I'm just simply willing to let you know how I pursued my career. But I don't really think the way I pursue it would work for somebody else. I think they find their own path because their needs are inherently specific and unique unto them as individuals.
We're also wired differently.
Absolutely.
Okay, the way I see and the way you see and the way John sees, and it's all different. We and again, it has to do with the way our brains are wired, and it's a very complex system. You've actually described photography as being a different language altogether, and you, if I'm not mistaken, you compared your experience of going out with a camera as to going into a place where you don't speak the language or read the language.
Well, hopefully that's under ideal circumstances because what it really means is that I've managed to access some new territory that I have not previously visited. And for this reason, when people ask me, what's your favorite photograph? I always respond automatically, my next one, because that's the one that's seriously the most important photograph for me.
Maybe I can change directions here a little bit. In reading on your work a bit, you've spoken about a concept of broken focus.
Yeah.
And I was hoping you could elaborate on that idea a bit.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too, Shia.
Well, that was an idea. The concept of broken focus was an idea that I was visiting many years ago, which was that normally we put the focus on where we want the picture to be the sharpest, and we choose that very carefully. I was photographing the collarbones of my wife and her torso, and there was a shadow where her collarbone could be seen underneath her skin. And so I decided I focus on that collarbone, and then I said, I'm going to push the camera a little bit forward so that the focus lands inside of her body. And that's where I got the idea of a broken focus. So I would do things like when I was doing a portrait, I would decide what would happen if you're making a portrait and you focus on the fellow's foot. What would you get? Because focus is something that we consider to be an absolute. It's almost as essential as in those days, putting the film in the camera. I like the idea of deconstructing the tropes of photography, the basic syntax. I like to re-examine it from another point of view in hopes and the attempt of isolating another bandwidth of visual intelligence by virtue of thinking that way.
How important is just the idea, and I say blind experimentation, I don't mean blind, without having a background and a history and doing the work, but is experimentation at the heart of what you consider the artistic and the creative practice?
I have never been interested in the aleatory approach. I do not experiment. I'm playing for much higher stakes. I need a kind of content. I need a resonance. I need to make a stronger photograph than that. Otherwise, if I'm not moving forward, I'm moving backwards. And at this point in life, it's essential that I continue to open up new territory in terms of my own self-respect. And experimentation is something that perhaps other photographers have used. I used to discuss this with Harry Callahan, who loved to experiment, but it just has never appealed to me. I'm a guitarist as well, and I understand the principles of jazz guitar and this and that, improvisation. But basically, even when you're improvising, you can only play what you know. And I want to see beyond what I see.
I noticed that one of your headshots was taken by Lou Reed, or at least, well, let me assume that is the same Lou Reed that we all know and love. What was your relationship with him? I mean, we know that he was a photographer, and Alan will chime in on his relationship. But how did that photograph come about?
Well, Lou and I had mutual friends, and we'd be meeting at the friend of. We have a mutual friend, a publicist named Annie Ohayon, who's a wonderful woman, French Moroccan, and we met at her house. And Lou had an old cousin, Shirley, who was about to turn 100, and he wanted to do a video about her, the conversation. And he invited me to lunch and said, "How would you like to do the camera on this video of me talking to my Aunt Shirley, who had worked in the garment district and was a union organizer and was just a great old lady?" And I declined. I said, "No, I had done some documentary camera work and it's too heavy and there was nothing in it for me." And so then he asked me to lunch another time. And on the third time, he said, "Well, I just got this new camera that's very small and it shoots video. And would you consider looking at it?" And, he had a 5D, which in those days was considered small. Looks like a truck to me now. But so I agreed to the project because I like his cousin Shirley very much. It's called Red Shirley. She was a real early union organizer, and she spoke with a very heavily accent from the old country, and she was very much in the American grain, one of those immigrants who added a lot to society. And so I could see how much he loved her, and Lou had a relationship to photography, and he asked me many of the same questions you're asking. But we did become friends, and it was sort of love at first sight, to be perfectly honest with you. We really, we played guitar together, we'd improvise together, and we talk a lot. And as you know, he was married to Laurie Anderson, who's also one of my dearest friends, whom I hold musically in the very highest rank of content. I think she's a magnificent artist. And so we were just friends for about 10 years until he passed on. And he took that portrait of me. I was working with my Leica Mono, my signature model, in 2013, and Lou was over. He had gotten one too, and he was over at our house on the beach and took that portrait of me, Wonderful. Which I liked a lot. I consider it to be a reflection of our friendship, of our rapport.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I kind of want to jump at, you talked about, big cameras and whatnot. I mean, was there ever a camera that almost pulled you away from Leica?
Never. I had been approached periodically by different camera companies, every 10 years or so. In fact, I once turned down $50,000 a year to say that I was making photographs now with this very, very well-known brand of Japanese camera. And I really didn't want to do it because I see the Leica as the way, it's like my Stradivarius. It's something that I will never get to the end of the capability of this instrument. And in my autobiography, Self-Exposure, I list the 7 most important decisions in my life. And deciding in 1961 that was going to be my camera for the rest of my career was one of the best decisions I made. and it's supported a great deal of activity throughout the decades of my life. And I continue to learn new moves with the camera. I continue to explore aspects of focal length and perspective, and I'm very happy that when the digital age, when I finally broke down and agreed to shoot digital, that I'm so pleased that the first photograph I made really satisfied me. The picture of the bicycle shadow in the manhole cover, in the cover of Mono, I knew instantly that the digital Leica would reflect my vision. So ever onwards. Now I'm shooting a lot with the M10 Mono and the M10R with 135 millimeter lenses, which is, as you know, is somewhat restricting, and I'm finding a tremendous vast resource of imagery out there that only that focal length can access.
And do you tend to do that, to stick with one focal length for a while and explore it?
I always have. I use the 50 millimeter lens for about 50 years, 99% exclusively. Right. And I will throw out this one idea that if you spend a few years just photographing with the 50, what you learn from the 50 millimeter lens, you can apply to all other lenses. If, on the other hand, you have a mixed bag of lenses, or you photograph for a few years with a zoom lens, at the end of that time, you won't know a single thing more than when you started. My position.
Well,
okay, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, more with Ralph Gibson and his new book, Sacred Land. Stay tuned. This episode of the B&H Photography Podcast is sponsored by Leica Camera. Check out the M10R digital rangefinder from Leica and all of their incredible cameras and lenses by following the link in our show notes. Okay, we are back. And by the way, the full name of Ralph Gibson's book is Sacred Land, Israel Before and After Time. And that's what we're going to be talking about on the second half of the show. Ralph, this is your newest book. Can you give us a little bit of background to this? You've made like 3 or 4 trips to take photographs for this book. Is that correct?
That's correct, Alan. It has a tremendously interesting genesis in that in 2018, I was in Paris and ran into my friend Martin Cohen at Perry Photo. And we were having tea at the Hotel Crillon, and he looked at me and said, "Have you ever been to Israel?" I said, "No, I haven't, but I've always wanted to go." And he said, "Well, how would you like to do a project?" And I said, "I'd love to." And so Martin commissioned me to photograph in Israel, and he provided the infrastructure in the most creative way as a perfect patron. He said, "All right, we'll arrange. We'll go several times. We'll make several visits, and I'll organize everything." And I had my assistant, Luis Marinho from Brazil, come. And we made 3 trips to Israel, each one of a 1-week duration over the course of 2019, spring, summer, fall. And I shot all digital. And what's so interesting is that I found the Holy Land to be such massively inspiring. I mean, I was just walking around with a lump in my throat the whole time. And I was 80 years old. And what I thought Israel was all my life, my inner imagination of it had nothing to do with what the country really made me feel. And it was extremely ecumenical. It was very, very profound. And so I was massively inspired. The photographs were just everywhere. And we would shoot all day. We'd go to 3 or 4 locations. We had vans, helicopters. We would shoot all day, and then we could edit at night, shooting digitally. I could see what I had done. And I would basically shoot my way into the next day's concerns. And years ago, Dorothea Lange had taught me the concept of point of departure. In 1960, when I showed her my portfolio, she said, "You have no point of departure, Rafael." And I said, "That's true, Dorothea. What is a point of departure?" And she said, well, if you're going down to the drugstore to buy toothpaste because you're going to buy toothpaste, if you see a picture worth taking, you have a much better chance of intersecting an event that's important because you're motivated and directed. So I have used a point of departure throughout my entire career. And when I got to Israel, prior to even going there, I said to myself, Israel is the oldest and the youngest country in the world. I'm going to photograph the old and the new as a concept. I'm going to look for the old, I'm going to look for the new. And I'm also going to work in black and white and color. And so this was my point of departure.
And visually, that place, I mean, I've been there several times. If you don't get inspired with a camera or just with your eyes when you're there, I mean, every place you look, it's just astonishing what's there. And it doesn't matter what your background is either. It's irrelevant. It's like I think anybody can connect with that part of the world. It's very powerful. Yeah.
And so with this in mind, we made the first trip, came back, and I quickly made a dummy, which is I'm going to be talking about in the Leica Academy bookmaking workshop. I made a dummy of around 30 pages, and then looked at it over and over for a few months until we made our second trip. So that by the time we went back a second time, we had a number of additional predetermined locations, and the country is so rich that just about any place you go is going to reflect something. And as you mentioned, I was raised Catholic as a kid and quit by the time I was 13 or 14, and I was very spiritual, but I was not very religious. But boy, you go to Israel, and it doesn't matter what faith you embrace; right. It's an enhanced experience.
Yeah, very spiritual place. No choice about it.
I have a question about this idea of the point of departure regarding this book. It sounds like the point of departure here was maybe a formal concern, or you wanted to do black and white and color, new and old. How does that differ from in past books and past series where perhaps the point of departure would be something else, would be more of a narrative concern or something along those lines? Uh-huh. Is that fair to say? And how would you?
That's a great question, and I'll tell you why. Because my previous books had been more insular, self-contained, smaller idea that I wanted to examine. By the time I got to Israel, I felt that I was at the top of my game in terms of my capabilities as a photographer. But I also realized that this was not just going to be about my point of view, pictures of how Ralph sees the world. I was going to have to, if I was going to do anything, if I was going to do the subject justice, I was going to have to get a little less arrogant, a little more humble. I was going to have to submit to the place. It was going to tell me, not me, it, what was going to be photographed. And this harkened back to my earlier training as a documentary photographer on the street, because you will notice that some of the photographs in Sacred Land are more formal and some are of a slightly more informational nature. And I love the idea of being able to combine figurative and abstraction in search of another kind of statement. But in the meantime, everything had to say Sacred Land. There's not a picture in there, there's not a diptych in that book which isn't of and for and about the Sacred Land. And that place is much bigger than any individual's vision. And it's again, part of the enormous impact that one experiences is going there is for that very reason. And so I simply followed where the country told me to go, where the experience told me to look. I mean, it could be anything that you see in Israel. It could be the close-up of a trunk of a tree that happens to be 2,000 years old or something like that,
right.
you know. So
You come back to the States and you see ads for Colonial Williamsburg over 200 years old, and you have to just giggle. You really do.
Well, it's a massive cultural experience, and I've studied the structural anthropology of Claude Lévi-Strauss, the structural anthropologist, and in this book called Sad Tropics, Triste Tropique, he says that the way you go into any culture is you look for the language of its signs. These signs will repeat themselves. For example, if I have a picture in the book of a stoplight, where it says stop in Hebrew, stop, it says it in Hebrew, Arabic, and English, you know that you're looking at the language of signs. And so there are a lot of, this was one of the ways that I go to any country, but it was much more emphatically evident in Israel. And that could be the mouth of a camel next to a truck with Arabic on it. It could be an ancient Torah covered next to a graffiti. You look for the signs of the culture, and that was a big part of how I produced that book.
Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned that you were shooting digital at this time, and you would go back at the end and edit. And obviously, in previous work, if you're on film, that's not the case. So, how did that look at the images in the overnight before you went back and shot the next day affect the work? I mean, did you find yourself looking to return to maybe get something again or better, or was there something about the process different?
None of the above. It was more like moving down a river. The further I went, the further I got. And one of the things that I'm extremely conscious of is attempting to not imitate myself. And I would never redo a picture. If I went back today, and we're hoping to go back and present the book as soon as lockdown is over with. As soon as I go back, I'll have my camera by my side and I'll photograph something that I hadn't yet photographed. As I stated earlier, I'm only interested in reasons why, not reasons why not. I want to move forward, not backward, as a principle. It's an aspect of morality, not aesthetics.
Interesting point.
Great
answer.
answer.
I could take a little bit of a switch here of direction. You've been a 50 millimeter shooter from the very beginning, and I was listening to a conversation you had with Dr. Andreas Kaufman of Leica, and you mentioned that you switched over to digital about 8 or 9 years ago when the original M monochrome came out. That you went from 50 millimeter to 75 as a new normal, and that the digital, the M10, the difference between the digital sensor and the film, even though the camera form is essentially the same, the form factor and the operation of it is essentially the same, you're now seeing with the 75. I find that kind of an interesting concept. I learned photography on a 4x5 camera 50 years ago. I went through every major system, and about a year ago, I got an M10 monochrome, and it's changed me dramatically, and I'm even having trouble figuring out why or how, but the camera changed me. But what gets me is, how is 75 your new 50? How do you explain that?
Well, I have a highly empirical set of observations, which I'll be more than happy to share, and it's simply that when I started working with the mono, with the 50, I started noticing a foreshortening or compression. And it occurred to me that because of the nature of the sensor, that I was getting what would have appeared to be the results of having a 58 or 59 millimeter lens, 60 millimeter lens. Now I evolved this theory, which may or may not hold water, which states that anything digital is compressed. Anything that passes through the digital space gets compressed. That could be banking, music, cinema, video, anything that the technology touches compresses and expands and compresses. And so I thought that with that in mind, digital was compressing light. Now, I know that this could probably be easily proven or disproven by a physicist or somebody who's deep into optics, but I know how things render. I've been making photographs for a long time, and I know how the 50 renders what I'm looking at. And so based on the idea that the 50 millimeter lens analog on Tri-X was what they called normal perspective being the laws of Renaissance perspective as were discovered a long time ago. I noticed that there was foreshortening and flattening, and I liked that look. And I said, I think it's inherent into as a component of the language of digital. I think it inherently compresses. And because I want to show what's different, not the same as film. I never wanted my digital images to look like analog photographs. I mean, we're speaking English now. I can describe this microphone to you in English. On peut se parler autour le micro en français, or I can describe it to you in French. But it's the same microphone, different language. So when I started working digitally, I said, I want to find out what is inherently digital language, and I want to learn to speak it. After 55 years in the darkroom, I had learned pretty much all I was going to learn from film and light on film. So with this approach, I started moving towards longer focal length and have kind of concluded that the 75 is closer to normal on a digital than a 50. It's a long answer to your question.
But, it's really funny is that when I was listening to you, that it struck me that I tend to be a 24 to 25 millimeter person. That's the lens that I have always felt most comfortable with. And now with the M10, I'm using a 50 and occasionally a 75 when I never used to. I never felt comfortable with a 50, and now I'm using it a lot. And I'm wondering if subliminally somehow I'm feeling the same thing you're describing, but I just never thought about it.
Well, it depends what you're photographing also. It depends, on your initial intention, what it is you're looking for, to what you want to hopefully see once you print out your photograph. But focal length is the grammar of photography. It's how we determine what we're going to say and how it's going to sound, or how it's going to look once we say it. And I will spend the rest of my life enjoying my studies of focal length, because I believe that there's a lot of language to be learned from it.
And languages have their limitations, and that takes me to my next question. Your compositions are incredible as far as being tight. There's no unnecessary information in your photographs, and it's one of the beauties of your photographs. You're an absolute craftsman when it comes to that. You're shooting with a Leica, and one of the limitations, one of the reasons why I always had a hard time adapting to a Leica over the years, and I tried several times. I've shot with them. I never owned one because I had one problem. I like getting close and tight, and those cameras by nature do not necessarily focus close without a whole bunch of extra attachments to them. And that's why I avoided it. So my question to you is that, do you crop? Are you okay with cropping? If you can't get in tight enough to get that picture and you have a very specific vision, do you crop? Is it okay with you?
I don't crop, and even if I did, I don't.
Okay.
No, I learned back from my street shooter days, I learned how to fill the frame. And I was speaking with one of my students in the advancing photographer thing the other day, that, it's very interesting. You can take a well-made photograph and you can tighten it up 1/4 of an inch on 4 sides, and it'll really pop and oftentimes get better. But you can't take a bad photograph and crop it and make anything out of it. Now, in answer to your question about the close-up thing, for many years, starting around from 1975, I discovered this the dual-range Summicron, which enabled me with the 50 to get closer with that eyepiece diopter you may know about.
Sure.
And then the lenses started focusing down to 2 feet 4 inches, 2 feet 2 inches, things like that. But the close-up really is determined by the size of the object that you're photographing. If you're talking about taking pictures of thimbles, then you need a macro lens. If you're talking about photographing a tree, a 50 is quite adequate. So there's many factors into filling a tight frame. In my case, let's consider how we approach the subject. If you're sitting in your living room with your wife after dinner, and I say take a photograph, well, you've got a living room, dining room, table, chairs, silverware, walls, lamps. You have a lot of things you could take a photograph of. If I say take a photograph of a smiling woman, you will subtract, eliminate, and ignore all those other aspects and move in to your wife's smiling face. Mm-hmm. So I essentially subtract anything I don't want in my frame. But this comes from a desire to accept all the responsibility for everything you see in one of my photographs. I can sign my name to any square centimeter of information on the picture plane. It is tight as a surface of a drum by intention.
Points taken. See, now my workaround, and again, the M10 monochrome was liberating in a way that because it had TTL, because I could see through it, I could put an EVF on and actually see through the lens. I can now put macro lenses on it, and that's how I got around. I now use lenses that focus closer, so I can use a camera that I love and take the pictures that I want to take. So that was my workaround. I see things small.
What is your subject matter?
That's it.
What are you photographing?
It could be anything, but I like tight abstracts. I like small things taken up real large in size. So I've always been, how close can I get to that? I want to get closer. And a Leica M system always stopped me. It prevented me from getting, unless I wanted to do a lot of cropping. But now that the Leica M digital cameras have, you can put an EVF on, you could use the screen on the back. I could actually, even though the camera is a rangefinder, and I guess to be pure, you should be using the rangefinder on it to focus, but they give you the option, and I take them up on it, and the EVF is gorgeous, and I can get in as tight as I need to get in. So that's how I worked around it, and the camera's amazing.
Oh, that's fabulous, yeah. Well, you see, once you have something you want to say, you will find a way to say it.
Thank you.
That's the moral of that story.
It. Yes, sir.
Maybe I can ask one last question before we depart. And you mentioned earlier that you're also a guitar player, and I'm always curious about how artists feel about the different arts and what photography and music in this case share, especially in terms of process and how you get to where you want to go, and also, in your opinion, what they'll never have in common.
Well, that's a good question, John. I started playing guitar when I was 13, and I started photography at 17. And I've had a lifelong relationship with the instrument. But when I was in art school, I made a choice to be a photographer, not a musician. But in the last 20 years or so, I've been studying composition and theory and harmony. And I came up with this idea that, photography has a relationship to reality. That's a very clear statement. Everybody knows what I mean. So you could say that reality to photography is what melody is to music. You see, you can take melody away and then you just have sound. You can take reality away and it might be a photograph, but you're defying one of the most inherent characteristics of the medium. So part of the reason my frames are so tight is that I am searching for an abstraction that exists on the borderline of both vision and sound. And the music I make has it has an underlying infrastructure of melody, but it's not the most important aspect of the composition. And reality is somewhat abstracted in most of my photographs anyway, at best.
It's you do speak a lot about music and photography, and you were friends with Lou Reed. I had an acquaintance with him also back in the 90s. I worked at PhotoCare before I came to B&H. And Lou came in one time. He was very much into photography, and he became a customer of mine. And he came, his last book was Lou Reed's New York City, which I have a copy of, and I cherish it. And a lot of people didn't get that book. And it was kind of weird. It was a lot of abstract night stuff, blurry things. He was taking pictures with cameras out the windows of taxis. It was very, very free form and organic. And I looked at the book, and it dawned on me pretty quickly that what he did was he took his cameras and used them the way he would use musical instruments. And each chapter in that book was just another cut of an LP. They each had their own pacing, their texture, their everything about it. It was like 12 or 13 different visual songs in book form.
Well, that's a really good take on that work. I know the book, of course, and the interesting thing about Lou's empirical approach was that he could recognize certain things in photography, but he was, again, really only interested in making a Lou Reed kind of photograph.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, about the time that he really started refining his dialogue, it was too late.
Yeah.
And but his work does stand up. He's been dead for 5 or 6 years, 7 years now. But when you do revisit his work in his absence, it seems to take on additional components which I enjoy thinking about. Many musicians, I'm friends with Andy Summers, who's also a very advanced photographer. And the fact that musicians are so often on the road stimulates them to photograph the experience, because it's one of the things you can do when you're constantly moving from point A to point B, town A to town B. It's one of the ways of expressing your temporality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. David Byrne does it too. In fact, he takes a folding bike wherever he goes, and he gets around towns by bike with his camera. And that's
David's a great artist.
Yes, he is. Yes,
he's a really good artist. Yeah. Did you see his play on Broadway?
I missed it. I am hoping to catch it next time.
Masterpiece.
Yep.
Well, Spike Lee made a film of it, which is pretty good. So
we have to catch that. Yes.
Well, photography is a common language, and it's available to all of us, which is another part of the beauty. Everybody speaks photography. Mm-hmm. You can show almost any photograph to almost any person on the planet, and he or she will react to it in the same way that you can play almost any kind of music to any person on the planet, and they will understand it as being music.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Ralph, it has been amazing speaking with you. Your explanations of things are so clear and so precise and so finely focused, if I could use that word here. Absolute pleasure talking with you. If people would like to see more of your work, what you're up to these days, where can they go to?
Well, they can go to www.ralphgibson.com, which is my website, and I have a lot of videos on YouTube as well, and if they want more, they can consider my program, the Advancing Photographer with the Leica Academy, and or the bookmaking workshop with the Leica Academy coming up.
Oh, that's in March. Is that correct?
That's correct, and we've just announced it recently, and it's starting to fill. And I look forward to it because, as you know, books have played a tremendous role in my life. And even in this digital age, I still consider the photography book to be the delivery system of choice in terms of supporting certain forms of content, getting the viewer exactly where you want them, how you want them to look at your work. And books remain very, very apparent in the world today.
All of the links that we were just discussing are going to be in the podcast show notes. So if you don't have it, just check that out, and it's all there. Ralph, absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope to have another chat with you at some point in time.
That would be great, Alan. Thank you. Thank you, John. All the best, fellas.
Thank you. Now, if you do not currently subscribe to the B&H Photography Podcast, there's no reason to wait. All you have to do is go over to wherever you snag your favorite podcast and type in B&H Photography Podcast, hit enter, and boom, you are part of the family. You can also find us on the B&H Explorer website and on the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group page. For now and forever, my name is Alan Weitz, and on behalf of John Harris and Jason Tables, thank you so much for tuning in today.